Weiß, and today I will be conducting an interview. I'm here at the University of Padua together with the organizers of the conference Encountering Objectivity, Professor Dina Emundts from FU Berlin, Professor Luca Illeterati from the University of Padua, as well as the two early career researchers who are mainly responsible for organizing the conference, Dr. Elena Tripaldi and Dr. Karen Koch. Now, the conference that brought us here together in Padua is concerned with historical accounts of objectivity. More specifically, it aims to elucidate how people understood this notion in the period known as German idealism. So we're mainly discussing ideas here that are 200 years old. Some will find that fascinating, but there have been others, such as, for instance, the Princeton professor Gilbert Harman, who infamously launched a debate about the relevance of historical accounts by putting a sign on his door that read, "History of philosophy, just say no." So, Professor Emundts, you hold a chair explicitly dedicated to the history of philosophy, and I think you also gave your inaugural lecture on this very topic. Could you tell us why you said yes to the history of philosophy and why you think it's important and relevant today?
This is really a big question. I would say my first reason is that it's really fun to do history of philosophy. I think it's really very rich and there are a lot of things to uncover, so I really think it's one of the best things you can do. Another reason is that I think that there are still discussions and answers that are relevant for us today. And maybe even one more interesting reason is that this is where we come from in a way. So I think that if we want to know how we use, for example, the concept justice or things like that are really relevant for all of us today, and of course also for the philosopher of contemporary philosophy, it's interesting to look how this concept was used 200 years ago. And
so in the sense that the history also preserves our cultural memory of things in a certain way?
Yeah, this, and also to see what we can get rid of, for example. That's also interesting. You have to look at history, for example. It's, for example, really interesting that so many of our concepts are really dense because of the religious ideas in the background. And that's something I think we should be aware of. And this is what history tells us.
Great, so that we get a better understanding of what's really at work and concepts we currently use also. Is that part of the point? Excellent. I think, Karen, you also said that you would like to add something on this particular topic.
Yes, I think so. So I agree. I also think it's very interesting that they convey the concepts we use convey these meanings from time of history that are still relevant today, and also to discover these meanings because we learn a lot of about the use or how we use them, these concepts. But also what I like is to discover really different theories, like theories that might appear a little bit weird or strange at the beginning, and you think oh my god, what is this? And then the more you get into it, you discover different views, different perspectives, and maybe views and perspectives that are not contemporary views anymore. And then I think it's really, really interesting because they challenge our own views we have today, and also the discovering of different metaphysical frameworks, for example. I think that is also really, really interesting because it might also challenge our own, or might help us to identify our own metaphysical presuppositions, for example.
So the history is also a resource for sort of not getting stuck too much on a certain track, and of sort of being able to get off the beaten tracks of contemporary standard views.
Yeah.
Excellent. Speaking of history, this workshop or conference also has a history, and I think Elena would be the person to ask about that.
Yeah, so it's a relatively young history, but already very rich of events. So this workshop is been developed within the framework of a DAAD Schuldialog program, But this is not the first project that we developed between Padua and Berlin. Actually, the chairs of Professor Illeterati and Professor Dina Emundts had already a very lively exchange of collaboration and students. And then last year, noting that there's also significant methodological and even content-wise overlap between the research that are being carried on at the two departments, we decided, well, maybe it's only good if we find a way or a format to get together and exchange our research and work in progress. And so we started with a bilateral workshop on the contemporary relevance of Hegel's metaphysics last year. By bilateral, I mean we always try to have one workshop in Berlin where mostly people from Padua present their work, and one workshop in Padua where it is the other way. So we have researchers from Berlin presenting their work, and since this first experiment on this specific topic of Hegel's metaphysics worked so well, we decided maybe we can find something broader, both format-wise and content-wise, and that's how we found this DAD Schuldialog mit Südeuropa program that allows to have even up to 25 people involved between young researchers and more advanced researchers between Padua and Berlin. And here we are discussing now about objectivity, which is a much bigger much bigger argument or topic throughout all figures of German idealism, so not just Hegel anymore.
Okay, so the whole topic broadened up, and it also, I think that what you just said also shows how you can actually make exchange between different centers really work, rather than just sticking to the same place and exchanging views with the people you already know. So that's great. So now I'm curious a bit more about the topic of the workshop, and I would like to know from Professor Illeterati, who worked a lot on the notion of nature and naturalism in the context of German idealism, but also beyond. What do you personally find interesting about the topic of objectivity in that context from your vantage point?
I think that the notion of objectivity is one of the main topics for today's philosophy, and I think that there are some similarities in the context of German idealism with the contemporary landscape of philosophy, in the sense that Kantian philosophy and then post-Kantian philosophy is a strong attempt to ground the notion of objectivity in a non-dualistic perspective. And we are now in a situation where there was a sort of division in the philosophical discussion between people in postmodern attitude thought that objectivity is always relative to some people, to some geographical situation or historical situation, and then a more scientific or analytic perspective that thought that we have to think of an objectivity that is not dependent from historical or geographical perspective. And I think this is a sort now of problem. What kind of objectivity we have? The situation of the German idealists was a little bit similar, in the sense that there was an empirical or metaphysical objectivity and a subjectivistic objectivity. And the attempt of the post-Kantians and of Hegel in particular is to supersede this division between a metaphysical or an empirical objectivity and a subjectivistic objectivity. In this sense, I think that we can find some sources for contemporary discussions in the clima, in the context of the German idealism about objectivity.
So after all, the past is very much up to date, according to your judgment, and there are debates that really are not the same, of course, as contemporary debates, but they address certain core ideas, and it can be fruitful to engage with them. Excellent. I think, Elena, I know that you do that quite a lot in bringing together different strands from contemporary philosophy and historical accounts, roughly in the ballpark of Hegel and Hegelian philosophy. What is your take on that issue of objectivity? Why do you do research about that?
The most direct and obvious reason is personal, because I enjoy it. I think it's very interesting, but of course there's more universal reasons that one can add for why objectivity is relevant, especially today. And I think I would go in the direction that Luca was suggesting. We were actually discussing this over dinner also yesterday, like what's gonna be the big movement in philosophy that's maybe still underwater, but it's gonna explode. And many people said realism, new materialism, differ buzzwords, but if you look at these movements, they all have objectivity at their core, in the sense of having to rethinking objectivity in a non-dualistic sense, because postmodernism had the merit of showing realism has not only theoretical problems but also political and societal negative implications. It is Eurocentric, it is anthropocentric. In realism you have one perspective and then one universal essence that you sort of just like extract with the same tools all the way throughout history, any other culture. Postmodernism highlighted this is not good. This is not good theoretically, it doesn't work theoretically, but also has negative political and societal implications, but then failed in bringing this project forth of giving an actual alternative, because it remained pessimistic or decadent and still anthropocentric, Eurocentric, privilege-centric, because you can be sad and depressed about the impossibility of achieving some objective or shared goal when you are not suffering from the impossibility of achieving such a goal. And now there are movements like new materialism or standpoint theory in feminism that try to say, no, we need to go beyond traditional realist understandings of objectivity, but also beyond postmodernism. And I think, as Luca was saying, this was a similar challenge that was going on in German idealism, and that's why I think a dialogue between these debates can be so fruitful, or at least it shows promise.
Oh, fascinating. So you think that there are certain currents in 20th century philosophy that are sort of, in a certain way, run dead theoretically and politically, but a good way to sort of make them fruitful again is actually not just to go forward, but to go back and discover certain innovative ideas of the past, and bring that back to a contemporary discourse, then, if I got that right?
Yes, that's actually the bet, because I don't think that a standpoint feminist would be so enthusiastic of me going to her and say, oh, well, actually there's this guy, white guy from Germany, Hegel, that says many interesting things that can help your research. So that's a claim that needs to be grounded, but that's also why we thought having a workshop with many people working on this topic can open perspectives to make a case strong enough. But yes, personally I would say there is a way to make a case for German idealism being one of the most promising, at least toolbox from history of philosophy, where we can maybe extract things that we can reapply in contemporary context and to contemporary questions. So of course we need an update, but yes, that would be the
So part of the work also is sort of making these resources available and fruitful for discourse. Okay, now we talked a lot about sort of academic issues around that, and maybe that's an open question everyone can answer. Do you guys think that there also are topics or issues, more broadly speaking, that go beyond the academic development of theory that relate to the notion of objectivity, or roughly to the ideas discussed at that workshop?
Oh, I think, for example, that notion of nature is a topic that has a lot of consequences in the societal and political context, and can be linked to the notion of objectivity. In the contemporary discussion, there is a great criticism against the notion of nature. There are some thinkers that says that we have to put away the notion of nature, because the notion of nature is a sort of dispositive of power, in the sense that the notion of nature embodied in itself a pathological relation between human and nature. And I think that to renounce to the notion of nature is not a good way. I think that it could be a good way to rethink and resemantize the notion of nature. And I think that the different directions of German idealisms give us some possibilities in this direction. For example, the notion of internal purposiveness in Kant is a sort of agency into nature. The notion of Hegel that organisms are a sort of passage structure between nature and spirit is a source in this direction. And in this sense, I think that it is not only an academic work, but it is something that has to do with problems of our time.
And that also confirms what Professor Emundts said earlier, namely that some of these problems are still relevant. Of course, the German idealists were fascinated by the relation of mind and nature and of reconciling potential gaps between that. But of course, they probably didn't think of that in terms of our contemporary environmentalist concern. But nonetheless, there's a parallel and an obvious one.
I think it's also, what's problematic, I think, is the idea of us being subjects that somehow master nature, that are masters of nature. And I think there it's really interesting to look into the history of philosophy, into classical German philosophy, and see what kind of conceptions do they actually have. For example, and there I think especially also Hegel is interesting, because one might think that he has this kind of mastering idea, but on the other hand you have also the idea that actually thinking subjects come from nature. That's, spirit, that nature is, so to say, kind of the origin of spirit.
And that's of course also a great way to connect the issue to more broadly to German idealists other than Hegel.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Because that's where the whole stuff came from originally, from philosophy of nature.
And I want also to really stress that it's not that we always have to have continuity. I mean, it's not that we only want to learn what they about what they said, but it's also that we want to see where we have to distance ourselves from them. I think this is a really important aspect, and many people think that if I'm working on Hegel, I think Hegel is right all the time. Of course, I don't. And I think it's really important that we have this in mind. Also, if we discuss, for example, the relation to nature, but also practical attitudes we have, a lot of goes back to something that is problematic and that we can see if we really deal with these theories.
Could you give us a concrete example for an idea where you get this feeling, for instance, with Hegel?
Yeah, for example, with respect to the big topics like feminism and racism, I think there are a lot of things where we have to really question the whole system, not only the statements he made, but also, is it really linked to the whole theory he has, or is it not? That's something we have to discuss. A topic where, for example, I mean, that's not that problematic, but a topic where I have been working on in recent times is the topic forgiveness. And I think it's really very important to see what goes back to a more religious, more Christian tradition, what we have still in mind when we talk about forgiveness. It's not that I think that we should get rid of all of it, but we should at least be aware that a lot of what we think should other people do has background.
So, and we should be selective in our endorsement of these views
Absolutely,
and differentiate them.
If I can add something about this, I totally agree with Dina, and about the importance of the confrontation with the history of philosophy and with some moments in particular of the history of philosophy. I think that history does not say only what we are, but what we are not. And only the confrontation with a different perspective that we find in the history of philosophy is our case, is a way in order to discuss our point of view, our perspective. Only in the encounter with another perspective, another way of seeing the problem, of seeing the topic, we have the possibility to discuss our perspective, our presuppositions, and so on. In this sense, I think that the work, the historical work in philosophy is essential to philosophy. It's not a marginal work.
I'm curious, do you think this is something exclusive to a historical perspective? Because I could imagine a decidedly anti-historical philosopher who says, all right, sure, I need other partners in discourse in order to check my own views and sort of to exchange reasons and check my arguments, basically, but I don't necessarily have to go back to past views for that. But some of what you said seemed to suggest that you think there's some particular value in doing that, as it were, with dead interlocutors.
I believe it is not the only method in order to have this experience, so to say, but I think that what we can find in history of philosophy is something particular in this dimension, in the sense that in the history of philosophy we have to do with notions, with concepts that we are using now in a certain sense. And when we see the work on these concepts in another time, into other perspectives, we have really the possibility to understand identity and difference of our uses of this concept. And when we speak about concepts, this work about continuity and discontinuity is essential in order to understand the concept.
And that's where we kind of just base our sort of the checking of our arguments on a merely individual level, but also have to take into account this historical situatedness. This conference is still running, so we have to come to an end at some point, but not without asking the organizers or the main responsibles about their plans to the future. Who wants to start? What further projects or further ideas for further discoveries do you have in mind currently?
Well, I think that like the workshops we organized before and now this one, they somehow give us a certain direction, so to say, at least like I feel like I have an direction and orientation that these workshops are giving me, because we were first elaborating on Hegel's concept of metaphysics in a broader sense, and then somehow we zoomed a little bit in on this concept of objectivity, and I feel like this gives me now, I would like to think now about the concept of historicity, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I feel, I think this was also a point at the first workshop on Hegel's metaphysics. We spoke about the concept of time, for example. So there was also already some, historicity, so to say, maybe in there. And then also now today, in this workshop here, the 2 days, we are also talking a lot about actually situatedness, about the fact that we are subjects philosophizing at a specific time, and about the question of how can we do that actually, what kind of demands can we actually have, what kind of objective theories, so to say, can we develop with respect to our own being historically situated.
So it's about making explicit the the historical theme of all these previous discoveries in a certain way.
Exactly, but without giving up somehow a sort of robust concept of objectivity. I think that's a challenge, so to say.
Of course. Elena, how about you?
Yeah, so I think content-wise, Karen already covered the direction where we could actually go, so zooming in or sort of declinating objectivity in this aspect of situatedness, historicity. So I think I would not add to what Karen already has presented in content-wise, but maybe more practical directions. So we got together several times, 4 times now over 2 years. Now it's time to also publish a little bit. So we have in the views the publishing of the proceedings of these 4 workshops that we have already done. And I think it would also be nice to maybe, so the ambition would be have like a yearly meeting that becomes regular, like this Padua-Berlin connection, have these workshops that take place maybe every year or every 2 years. That would be really nice to establish something that we can maybe also leave to other generation of early career postdocs that can continue. So I think that's a very nice perspective to look upon, and I think we will work in that direction.
Wonderful. So it looks like there is a future to the history of philosophy, and I think with that we've made a wonderful circle, starting from historical topics to the concrete application, their potentials and also problems that arise in their discovery. And yeah, thank you very much everybody for discussing with me.